Hey guys, we're excited to have you join in on the conversation that Daniel and I had about the leadership crisis that we see and some startling statistics that go along with that. One solution to this crisis is actually leading like Christ. And how do we do that? Through following him.
Hmm.
Join us as we talk and unpack some of the statistics and how we can be better followers of Christ. Hey
Yeah.
Daniel,
Hey, Shannon. It's
I'm
great.
excited to be talking with you today about something. I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are.
I appreciate that. I love having great conversations, and I know these articles that you've got in your hands here, and I think it really speaks to just the day and age in which we've been called to live and lead.
Mhm.
And I'm deeply encouraged at the way that God is working through men and women around the world, and the conversation we're going to have because I think it'll be an encouragement to everyone who listens. So
I agree.
thanks for sitting down and making this a reality.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I feel like I'm one of the watchers, except for I'm sitting in the room asking the questions.
Mm.
Hopefully, a lot of people watching would have the similar as me. And the first thing, I wanted to start our conversation with some statistics from a Barna research article that was done actually in 2019.
Okay.
But the title of the article, and this will be linked at the bottom for you guys to follow along with us. 82% of young adults say society is in a leadership
Mm.
crisis. And I'm kind of on the borderline of a millennial.
Mhm.
And so I remember some of the things that were said about millennials and the way that they were going to influence the workforce and the future of politics
Yeah.
and society. And I don't know what's being said about the next generation, but I do know there have been some things said because we're talking about 18 to 35-year-olds. And so this is past the millennial, this is the Gen
Mhm.
Z folks. And it says when we take time to listen, an essential practice for connecting with this age group, we hear a sense of unease about the future and uncertainty about the kind of leaders that could make a difference. And some of the statistics that come with that, 43% strongly agree, 39% somewhat agree with this statement. Our society is facing a crisis of leadership because there are not enough good leaders right now.
Man, it's a real humbling and I kind of think startling statistic, Shannon. You just shared that a, a super majority of people in the next generation are looking for leaders or looking at leaders and saying, I just don't see it. I
Right.
just don't see that kind of hope, opportunity, resilience
Absolutely.
into the future. And you know, I think some of that is really um, a reflection of the leadership crisis that they're seeing because they're stepping into it, but that the whole
Hmm.
world is experiencing.
Absolutely.
We see the evidences of a leadership crisis in all of the brokenness in institutions, the broken institutional distrust that exists. Right, people have the lowest levels of trust with institutions in modern history, in recorded history.
Correct.
Really, they just don't believe.
Hmm.
The news. They don't believe the government officials. They don't, and this is a global phenomenon, a global problem. Um, and so that leadership crisis is a result of, I think, brokenness in trust, broken relationships. You mentioned that they feel a desire to be heard, to be
Hmm.
listened to.
Hmm.
I think that there's a little bit of that's in all of humanity. We all want to be connected. We all want to be heard. We all want to have an authentic sense of relationship. I think in evangelism, for instance, one of the most important things we can do is just listen, right?
Hmm.
Just to actually hear out their story and where
Right.
they are in that journey. But with this upcoming generation, I think it's particularly acute because they live in a megaphone context where
Hmm.
everything is being blasted at them. They
Right.
are the subject of advertising. They're the subject of so much talking at that they miss those opportunities for authentic listening,
Hmm.
reshaping and forming of their own opinions, mindsets, and beliefs. And that's where as we look at this crisis of leadership, we've got um, a real struggle of reestablishing trust, confidence, faith, belief in these institutions,
Hmm.
right? Well, that's only really going to be done via individuals in those
Right.
individual relationships. And so
Absolutely.
I think it's incumbent upon each of us to look at the relationships that God has placed around us um, and begin to, you know, build out that trust, that consistency of character and integrity that fosters um, the opportunity for influence to take place, right? If
Right.
leadership is influence, and then we're saying, how do we help the next generation believe that there are leaders that can influence the direction of a nation or a world in the right way? Well,
Correct.
we gotta demonstrate that in our lives
Right.
in leadership, and I think that's just as incumbent upon us as younger leaders, but
Hmm.
also incumbent upon the generations that have gone before us
Right.
to elevate, to put into those roles and positions and opportunities for them to see, experience, and learn. Um, you know, before they really need it.
Right.
I think of the leadership crisis. Some of that I think is because people haven't had the opportunity. Right. We've had some ice and snow and such in our part of the world here recently, and it's a part of the world where we don't get a whole lot of that
Right.
on the regular.
Hmm.
And I'll never forget having the opportunity when I was first learning to drive in that kind of a context, and how the blessing of that was, um, well, I had some practice in it before I really needed it. Right,
Right.
I still had insurance from my parents. There was still an opportunity for some good medical care, or whatever, so that when I drove an ice later as an adult, I'd already experienced it. It wasn't totally novel,
Right.
and so and it gives you a lot of respect for the context of that difficulty. When we allow younger leaders to step in and to see, they'll begin to understand better the 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 difficulties of leadership, the unique stresses of leadership, and ultimately begin to see and trust more. Oh, this is why you're making those decisions. I now understand it a little better.
Right.
That fosters more trust, and that trust enables for greater influence in leadership.
Absolutely. Gives
Yeah,
them a chance to see a different perspective and walk through some of those trials with guidance.
absolutely. Yeah,
That's great. A couple of the breakdowns of the statistic
yeah.
that will kind of segue into the article we're going to unpack. The question was asked, what do you think are the biggest challenges to leadership in society today?
Mm,
50% said everyone is too busy and distracted. 43% says everyone has to compete in the global marketplace.
mm.
41% society is becoming so fragmented. And then the last one really caught my attention was 26% of these young people believe that no one wants to be a follower
Mm.
anymore.
Yeah, you know, again, each of those statistics I think are so informative, and I would encourage each of you listening to really look over those numbers and think about your experiences with them. Uh, Shannon, one of the things that I think stands out to me is uh, really that last thing you said, which was so many. What was that percentage? Don't think they want people want to follow.
26%.
26%. So a quarter of people just believe that people don't want to follow anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that really that is connected to this megaphone culture
Mm-hmm.
of the West more broadly.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's necessarily as true globally. I don't know who their research sample was, and how global that was. Um, but I think certainly the influence of the West is carrying across the next generation. But it does lead to a context where, uh, if that is true, I think the best remedy is for people to experience um, experience what it's like to lead, and then realize that they have so much learning to do.
Right.
Right? I think about kind of stereotypical Western teenager who says, "Oh, I know this, I know that. I could just figure all these things out." Right? And there was a sign that one of my teachers had that said, "Hey, while you still know everything, why don't you go ahead and go out and do it?"
Mm-hmm.
With the joke being, every adult will tell you, "Yeah, we used to think we know a lot more than we knew, and
Mm-hmm.
now we realize what we didn't know."
Right.
Right? And so I think there's a degree of that where, hey, in every generation, there's some degree of, I just don't know how many protections and provisions were made for me
Mm-hmm.
to get to where I am.
Right.
Um, and a little time and a little humility can provide
Mm-hmm.
for that. Um, but I, I think for a lot of those next generation leaders, they're just yearning. They're really just yearning to see personally. And again, it
Mm-hmm.
comes back to that relationship factor, right?
Right.
And as we look at the life of Jesus, right? I mean, we talk to explicitly Christians in this context where, hey, the life of Jesus was so highly relational. He didn't just give precepts and principles to the disciples; he walked with them.
Mm-hmm.
He yeah, that idea of follow me was like to catch the dust off of the rabbi's feet as they walked, right? Like
Right.
to be in that kind of proximity, to share
Right.
meals, to fellowship, to encounter celebrations like the wedding and
Mhm.
sorrow like the death of Lazarus, and to walk that journey alongside these followers with Jesus. I think that's an art of leadership that the modern context has missed.
Mhm.
And here's my working hypothesis. I believe we have sought to make leaders and leadership more efficient, which has depersonalized that relational aspect to
Mhm.
such a degree that the next generation knows their leaders. I mean, really knows their leaders
Mhm.
so much less we don't even realize it.
Right.
We don't even recognize how much less we have a genuine relationship with the leaders in our lives. I've been listening to a book called The Shepherd Leader, and it's talking about uh, 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 you know church leadership, and specifically like leadership structures within the church and all those kinds of things. But there it wasn't that long ago that there was a day where a pastor, and there's still many that are probably listening to this, where the pastor would do your wedding, do your funeral, do all the
Mhm.
visits in between,
Yep.
right? Baptize you, baptize your children. Like
Mhm.
it was a lifelong walk in relationship. And in so many contexts now, that's just not present. I mean,
Right.
5 years, 7 years, maybe that particular pastoral leader in your life is present. In so many political realms, you've got just constant turnover
Mhm.
in leadership in those contexts. And so,
Right.
the upcoming generation, they know names, but they don't know people.
Right.
Right? They haven't had a meal at your table. They've not really walked life with you.
Yeah.
They've never even had the opportunity to do that because, if you're at yeah, the average church in the States is 80, but 80 or 90 in the congregation. But even that's hard for one
Mhm.
for one pastor or family to
Right.
try and to walk alongside. So I say all of that to say I think some of the symptoms we're seeing are connected to, right. They're seeing and sensing a deeper sense of that leadership crisis because they just are lacking all those relationships. And I think the long term ramifications of that will be that when that generation becomes the next generation of leaders, they will be less experienced, less understanding. They will have had less direct mentorship, discipleship, and development, and they'll end up being a less equipped generation of leaders because they just
Mhm.
simply haven't received the kind of relational mentoring, discipleship, and the equipping necessary for
Right.
their long term success, whether that be in explicit ministry calling or whether that be in ministry via vocation.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's a real tension that the modern church, the growing church, is having to wrestle down.
Right.
Another interesting just thing to share. I recently saw, you know, um, there was a famous phrase in the 1970s that the world has reached peak oil, right?
Mhm.
This idea of the global production of oil has maxed out. Um, I saw a study that said in the year 2000 we reached peak child, where
Wow.
the global rate of the next generation coming into the world has hit its peak. And
Wow.
so, what is that long term ramification for
Mm.
next generation leadership? How do
Mhm.
you start leading when those kinds of things change? You know, as a leader who's connected to some of that, yeah, okay, God, I need some wisdom from the leaders who have gone before me, some experience poured into me to help me
Right.
navigate some of that, because otherwise we'll find ourselves ill equipped for the day and age that God has placed us.
Yeah.
Because there's wisdom and experience in those generations that have gone before us, and whether that's relational or maybe they wrote a book or whatever, we need to find those things and begin
Right.
to mobilize that so that that crisis can not only be averted but turn from crisis into triumph.
Mhm.
You know, and the next generation of leaders can really be deployed for greater
Right.
kingdom impact.
Absolutely. And there are so many things that you touched on that the article that we're going to kind of unpack together
Yeah.
also touches on with some significant bullet points.
Yeah.
And the article that we're referencing came from Tim Tucker. He wrote it for the Luson organization. And the title of the article, which we'll have below for you, is We Need New Leaders Responding to the Cry of the 21st Century.
Mm.
And I would just like to say that the statistics we're talking about came from 2019. This was pre-COVID, and I would be interested to see the same people surveyed again because I think it's gotten worse
Yeah.
in the society that we're at now. And a couple of things in this article, we'll go through the bullet points, but the first thing that he talks about transitioning into becoming leaders of character is followers first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting that those statistics talked about how nobody's followers anymore. And of course, in this article, he says to be Christ-like leaders, our primary identity is not as leader, but as follower.
Mm.
The greatest Christian leaders are the greatest followers. And he's talking about being followers of Christ.
Yeah.
And I think that's so interesting how he pinpointed that we've lost sight of that some. And last quote that I want to hear your thoughts on. He says, "Our effectiveness as leaders will be directly proportional to being spirit-led followers of the master leader, Jesus Christ."
Well, there's no question, right? That is, I think, fundamentally true. Um, you know, we are fruitful in the abiding,
Mm-hmm.
right? To produce the fruit which God has called us to produce, we must abide. It's actually, that's why his yoke is easy and his burden is light, is because the one thing he's asked us to do is to abide in him.
Right.
And he is a good shepherd. He is, gentle and kind. And so that practice is so vital. I think, Shannon, you talk about a follower first. I would say I think the misnomer that has taken place is we have turned from this. We have seen the problems and the need for leadership development as a global body, right? And there are people that are working on this, but we often place that as an aside to our followership of Jesus, not as an
Mm-hmm.
extension of it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I lead the International Leadership Institute, so I have some deep thoughts on this. But I think the most compelling aspect of the material that God has blessed us with, right, written by countless men and women around the world, working together to establish not only these 8 core values, but the curriculum and experience that we've given to some 400,000 alumni across
Mm-hmm.
100 nations of the world.
Right.
All of that to say, it's all biblically based, and it's an extension of our followership of Jesus.
Absolutely.
Right? That to me is one of the most meaningful aspects of the leadership paradigm that we have, is that it's an extension of that followership of Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
not an addition to it.
Right.
Right? I don't have John Maxwell over here and Jesus over here.
Right.
It's no, this is all, how am I following Jesus? And then in that, how does that produce those kingdom things as I'm called to lead and influence
Absolutely.
others in that process? So, and practically, we teach intimacy with God as one of the 8 core
Mhm.
values of the most effective
Right.
Christian leaders. And
It's
so
always taught first.
it is taught first. And as we talk about intimacy with God, one of my favorite quotes is to ask a room of people, "Do you know the president of your country?" And of course, they're all, yeah, I know,
Mhm.
I know. Okay, what do they have for breakfast? And nobody knows, man.
Mhm.
Nobody knows, because we know, but we don't know,
Right.
right? In the same way, I think we have people who can have a head knowledge of Jesus,
Mm.
but they don't have a genuine, ongoing, abiding relationship with him.
Right.
They have a relationship with him, but it's overly professionalized,
Mhm.
right? There are all of these kind of temptations that we walk down, right?
Mhm.
Intimacy, information over intimacy is one that,
Right.
that I can often struggle with, right? Where I've
Right.
got a whole lot of doctrinal understanding and belief and theology, but am I walking with this person,
Mm.
right? And the Spirit of God indwelling within me. And so,
Absolutely.
trying to navigate that, uh, I think that as we see, and as the leaders who have come before us have seen this leadership crisis, uh, what they actually, ha- you know, are seeking to resolve was a symptom more than the root. And I think the
Mhm.
root is really where God is sending this next generation, is to say, hey, we've got to be effective followers of Jesus. And out of that followership, we'll find ourselves to be fruitful, faithful, and productive toward the kingdom, right?
Right.
And that's going to include the sharing of the good news of Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, the hope of the redemption, both now and in eternity. And it's also gonna mean just the kingdom coming, right? Thy
Mhm.
kingdom come, thy will be done, and the transformation that brings to communities as believers step into their calling as followers of Christ.
Right.
I think that's transformational.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think not just the next generation, but even our generation and people who are nearing the end of their work,
Mhm.
space, getting close to retirement, maybe not seeing what they thought would be the fulfillment of their dreams and such. All of us can at some point struggle with being a good leader or a well-known leader or someone who, led a ministry when really it's just we're that person who did something really awesome and we somewhat want some credit for, yeah, I did this awesome
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And coming back to the article, he quotes Paul in 1 Corinthians 11:1 saying, "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." And he says, Paul became arguably the greatest ever Christian leader because he was the greatest follower in Christian history. As Afrika Mohalefi concludes, an effective Christian leader is someone who publicly mimics the life of Jesus.
Amen.
And I feel, and because I resonated with some of that, the statistics there, and seen some of the similar things in 2019. And so, um, you know, we have lost sight at times of realizing that the most effective thing we can do is lead like Christ and live
Mhm.
like Christ.
Mhm.
And whether it comes with accolades and fame and certain results that you've looked for, that's a win.
Mhm.
That is an effective leader.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really intriguing.
I can't agree with that more. And again, it obviously obviously God is desiring for all to come to faith, to a saving knowledge of the hope found in Jesus Christ alone. And I celebrate and rejoice in all of those growth initiatives and things that leaders are striving toward. um I think the ongoing, you know I don't know if it's like the call to remember or the call to watch out for the the tiger, the lion that's crouching at the door,
Hmm.
um, is to remember, hey, that that thing that you're trying to produce is not yours to produce. It's his to produce.
Very
He
good.
is the one that's producing it. And so,
Absolutely.
yes, man, we pray for massive
Hmm.
growth
Hmm.
in our congregations, because people are coming to faith, because that brings you worship and glory and honor, and you are worthy and
Hmm.
so majestic and deserve that from every people, language, not tribe, nation, tongue. Like that is absolutely the thing that we ought to be rejoicing in, and yet it is something that you produce.
Mm.
And so we cannot look at a life of faithfulness that lacked some measure of productivity, according to our own worldly standard of productivity,
Right.
and go, sorry, right? Because just think of David. He was the scrawny one out in the field. He wasn't the one that as they looked around and went, we should just go ahead and they left him out there because they didn't think, oh,
Hmm.
he's not going to be the one that's anointed. It's
Right.
somebody else. I got a lot of boys here, right? Jesse's going, I got a lot of kids. It's not that one. Somebody's got to watch the
Hmm.
sheep.
Right.
Um, but God was looking for something different. And so, I am uh, increasingly convinced that the leaders I see finishing well have one thing in common. It's a lifetime of practiced faithfulness, so that when they get to those other moments in life, they're prepared for it. You know,
Absolutely.
and you talked about retirement, and I think there are a lot of believers who rightly are recognizing, "Nah, I don't even think that's that's a Christian frame." But I
Yep.
heard a pastor say this. He said, I stopped being the senior pastor of a church, and it was a couple of months later that somebody, it was during COVID, that they stopped being the senior pastor of the church. And during COVID, they each had kind of like assigned seats. And so you had to check in with someone to find your assigned seat. And so he walks into the church, rather large church, and the person checking them in didn't know who he was.
Mm.
And so he said the last name, and she didn't know who he was.
Wow.
And so she just said, "Oh, here you go." Gave him his seat number, and he recognized in that moment, oh wow, that hurt more than it should have.
Mm.
Right? Like that stung
Right.
more than it should have.
Yep.
And I think that is the natural conclusion of the tension that every Christian leader is going to face. Is there's some part of ourselves that we're constantly having to die to, and our failure to die to it at certain moments and times, it's going to be detrimental. It's going to be
It
it's going to be
is.
dangerous.
It is.
And again, all of this points back to that crisis, that crisis of leadership, because there are some who stop dying to self. They stop it altogether.
Yeah.
And the long-term ramification of that is organizations being led by, narcissistic, self-serving
Hmm.
leaders,
Yep.
and that is hugely damaging uh, to the church and to the work that I think God is calling His people to do.
It
And so,
is.
as I listen to that, yeah, followership first, because that's the only way we can effectively serve and lead. And that, again, comes back to Paul, right? For I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless,
Hmm.
I live, but not I. It's Christ who lives in me. So that
Absolutely.
constant dying to self has to be um, practiced with a maybe a greater degree of, I don't know if the word is consistency or vigor, but a greater degree of intentionality
Hmm.
than maybe we even realize, because we live in such a self promotion, self adulating day.
Right.
And so I think, man, that's such a good frame
Hmm.
to keep in front of us as we
Right.
seek to address that crisis. Hey, I hope this has been encouraging to you as we looked at not only this leadership crisis, but some of what we see and how we see and where we see God bringing transformation as people learn to lead in the same way that they follow Jesus, and the transformational work that brings. We've got a lot of great conversation coming up. I would love if you guys stick around. The next episode that's coming out, it's going to continue to look at what we've got coming about character, competency, and charisma. Which of those are Christian leaders supposed to be pursuing with their life and leadership? Look forward to seeing you next time.
Hey guys, welcome back to the conversation Daniel and I are having about the leadership crisis we are seeing unfolding.
I'm so sorry. I tried so hard. I tried so hard. Oh,
Blooper.
oh. I'm so sorry, guys.
It's all good. Our smiles are going to be
Mhm.
big. Intro 2.4. Hey guys, welcome back to the conversation we're having on the leadership crisis that we're seeing statistically. Today we're going to unpack what is God looking for? Character, competence, credentials, charisma. Join us as we unpack some of these topics and discuss further how we can be better leaders in our society today. Character, competence, charisma, credentials. Join us as we discuss what God is looking for in leaders today.